Mollie Monroe was the first woman to be declared insane in Arizona. She also tried to burn down the insane asylum, but we'll come back to that. Hello, and welcome to AZ Unveiled, the place where I deep dive into all of Arizona's dark, spooky, and sometimes straight up weird history. I'm Emily, your resident obsessive researcher and fourth-gen Arizonan. This week, we're deep diving into the life of one of the toughest pioneer women in Arizona history. Let's start at the beginning. She went by many names: Mary Sawyer, Sam Brewer, Cowboy Molly. One newspaper called her Fighting Mollie Monroe, the Amazon of Arizona, but most often she just went by Mollie Monroe. Regardless of what she was calling herself, the woman who was born Mary Elizabeth Sawyer was a force to be reckoned with. I could not find any photos of Mollie, but she was described as having a slight frame, red hair, and green eyes. Mollie was born into a well-to-do family in 1846. Her birthplace is listed as Mississippi on an 1870 census, but her obituary states that she was born in New Hampshire. So either one of those places. Or maybe New York. Anyway, she attended finishing school so that she could learn how to become a dutiful wife, as was the highest goal of all proper ladies at the time. Those plans were interrupted, however, when at 17 years old, she fell in love with a young man whom her parents deemed unfit for her to marry. So, to keep Mollie from making the life-ruining decision of marrying for love instead of stature, the young man became what is known as a remittance man. That is to say, he was sent out west and paid to never ever return home, so as not to bring shame and embarrassment upon his family.
Dishonor on you! Dishonor on your cow!
But as is the case with most headstrong teenagers, when you tell them to do one thing, they go and do the opposite thing. So Mollie was not so easily detoured by the long distance. About 2 months after her beloved was sent away, she snuck out of her parents' house under the cover of nightfall, disguised as a man, and joined a prospecting party to go find the love of her life. This is when she took up the moniker Sam Brewer. By the time Mollie, now Sam, had made it to Santa Fe, New Mexico, she discovered that her true love had been slain in a bar fight just 2 weeks before she had arrived. Mollie was absolutely devastated by the news, but rather than returning home brokenhearted, Mollie took a different approach. She vowed revenge. Mollie once again donned her masculine attire and set off in search of the killer. According to the book Stalwart Women, Frontier Stories of Indomitable Spirit by Leo W. Banks, Mollie donned disguises ranging from scout to stage driver as she traversed the western states and even to Mexico to find those responsible for killing her true love. But alas, it was to no avail. She then disappeared for several months. Mollie eventually reemerged in Fort Whipple in the Arizona Territory in 1864. Now 18 years old, she was married to an Army captain, and by all accounts, she appeared to be the perfect, well-mannered wife. This would not last, however. In 1865, her husband was transferred, but Mollie chose to stay. They didn't say why, but before long, she was back to wearing buckskin shirts, trousers, and a gun slung around her hip. It was said that she was quite the crack shot. She became very well known around town because not only did she wear men's clothing, but she also drank, gambled, and swore like the worst of the men. And she was making fast enemies of the more respectable ladies in town. Any strangers that came through town actually thought she was a young man. In fact, seeing her in feminine attire was such a rare sight that when she did actually wear a dress on one occasion, it made the newspaper.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
By 1877, she had married again, unofficially anyway, this time to a man named George Monroe, who had also been a soldier, but had since made a name for himself as a pioneer and a miner. The pair spent a lot of time mining in the Bradshaw Mountains near Wickenburg. In 1874, they discovered a hot spring, which they named Monroe Springs. Well, discovered by pioneer standards. Of course, the indigenous people of the area had known about the hot springs for a long time, but that's a whole other video. So Monroe Springs and the surrounding land were sold to Frank M. Murphy in the 1880s, and by 1896, Murphy had turned the springs into a full-blown resort, which he named Castle Hot Springs. It was frequented by some of the biggest names of the time, like the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers. It's actually still open today as a world-class resort. But Back to Mollie. Both Mollie and George had success with mining over the years. Mollie made a cool $2,500 in the sale of an interest in one of the gold mines she discovered, which is about $58,000 today. Unfortunately, it was also said that she gambled and drank away that money within 10 days. But despite her crude reputation, Mollie was kind-hearted and never ignored a cry for help. She would ride for miles to come to the aid of those who had fallen ill or who needed help. One story tells of her coming to the rescue of 20 soldiers who had been attacked. Mollie and her riding companion had to leave their horses and carry on fighting on foot to reach the soldiers who had been surrounded. They surely would have been killed if Mollie had not intervened. She would also regularly raise money to help miners and prostitutes, and even gave much of her own money to help those in need. She had a particular soft spot for single women and children. In another famous tale, she tracked down a man who had abandoned his wife and children for 3 days while he said he was out getting supplies. But Mollie found him at a bar, coaxed him out, tied him to her horse, and dragged his back home. She even stayed overnight to make sure he wouldn't try to leave again. Sadly though, all of her charitable deeds could not save her from judgment by her fellow townspeople. Quoting from Stalwart Women again, the more that the newspapers reported her eccentricities, the louder were the public's demands to rein her in. On charges of indecent dress, foul language, drunkenness, they accused her of being addicted to liquor and morals that are dissolute. Eventually, the townspeople would get their wish. In 1877, the Prescott sheriff found Mollie wandering aimlessly, looking disheveled and acting irrationally. With little to no record of her transgressions, she was brought to trial and declared insane. Arizona did not have an insane asylum at the time, so Mollie was sent to the Stockton, California insane asylum. Mollie was not one to go quietly, however. Within a few months, her agitation had increased to the point where she attempted to burn down the insane asylum. For safety concerns, she was transferred to San Quentin Prison until a new asylum was built in Phoenix, and she was transferred again. Mollie was registered at the Phoenix Asylum as patient number 2. The Phoenix Asylum was originally called the Territorial Asylum for the Insane. Upon its opening in 1887, 61 patients were transferred from Stockton, 49 men and 12 women. What was touted as a facility for mental health, in actuality was more of a prison for those that society didn't know what to do with. It housed those suffering from alcoholism, drug addiction, and even epileptic fits. The focus wasn't so much on rehabilitating the patients as it was on keeping them contained. This is the very same asylum that 46 years later would hold the infamous trunk murderess Winnie Ruth Judd for nearly 4 decades. Mollie herself would end up spending a quarter of a century behind asylum walls, never being deemed fit to re-enter society. In January of 1880, the Arizona Weekly Miner published a story claiming that Mollie would resort to any stratagem to obtain a bottle. Mollie protested though. She was quoted as saying what the doctors were calling her craziness was in fact meanness, and that she was the meanest thing on earth and intended to be so until she was turned out and allowed to live as she pleased. There were a number of people who would claim that Mollie was neither mean nor crazy. It was remarked on numerous occasions that Mollie didn't show any evidence of insanity at all, and her penchant for helping those in need never diminished either. The matron of the asylum noted that Mollie was always ready to assist those who were unable to help themselves. She remained in the Phoenix Asylum for 8 years. And then, in 1895, when Mollie was 49 years old, she escaped. Being that she was only known to have a bottle of water and a few crackers, and that she escaped into a massive wild desert, it was assumed that she would be found dead. But forever defying the odds, Mollie eluded capture for 4 days and was found 15 miles away. And she was only found because the Maricopa County Sheriff, who could not find Mollie himself, paid off some indigenous trackers to find her for him. She had walked barefoot through rugged terrain and a forest of cacti. She was bleeding and in rough shape, but her spirit was not diminished. She was quoted to say, "If I'd only had my breeches and my gun, I'd have been alright," minus a few expletives that were not fit for print. Mollie was returned to the Phoenix Asylum, where she quietly died in 1902 at the age of 56. Mollie's personal life was tumultuous, to say the least. In her lifetime, she was made out to be a woman driven crazy by alcoholism and a broken heart, who had to be contained for the safety of herself and others. Perhaps she just didn't play the role that was expected of women at the time and was chastised for it. Luckily now her legacy is that of a complicated woman maybe, but more importantly, a courageous and kind-hearted woman who never stopped fighting for those who were marginalized. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Arizona's history. And if you have another historical Arizona figure you'd like to hear about, let me know in the comments. As always, I'm Emily, and this is AZ Unveiled. See you next time.